Stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. If relationships are the key to happiness, then communication is the doorway, and communication is most engaging and effective when we use stories as the foundation. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, and to connect, but what we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you and you'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of those. When I'm working with my communication clients, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen to consider your related stories. To listen and to consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. Yes, yes, and yes. So what was the next step? Find ways to change the pattern. First, I had to remember the worst of my boss's behavior and consider what led up to those incidents. Then I had to think about the worst of my previous situations and think about my behavior to see if there was a pattern on my part. In some situations, I couldn't find anything to indicate I was about to be treated badly, and in those situations, I had a sense of relief, knowing that what had happened was either a person dealing with their own stuff and projecting it on me, or they were simply cruel and unpredictable. But in other situations, I could see that I might have contributed. For instance, I find that when I get into a situation where my job becomes maintenance, and I'm not learning anything new or interacting with people enough, I get bored. That's dangerous for me. I saw a pattern of self-sabotage when I reached that point, not only for work, but even in my relationship with my husband. I could also see that despite my observations of some of my past supervisors and their insecurities, there were times when I might have come across as assertive and even condescending. I could, with mostly certainty, be comforted knowing it wasn't ever intentional on my part. But if my behavior was contributing to their insecurities, it isn't surprising that they behaved badly. I'm not particularly nice to people who appear to be know-it-alls, even if it seems unintentional. Part of my pattern was that I would stay in an abusive situation for a number of reasons, beginning with the desire to fix things. Despite an internal voice screaming at me, my other internal message would say, "It'll be okay. You can fix this," especially in a job that I generally enjoyed and knew I was making a positive impact. Looking back at those abusive work situations and having some sense of how I might have contributed, I was ready to make some adjustments, including choosing to stand up for myself and maybe leave when I knew things were not going to change. As we all know, change isn't easy. Even when you know something has to happen in order to find happiness, it's difficult. And it didn't take long, despite my resolve to address those patterns, to start to sink again into the hopelessness of a bad work situation. So there I was, at my lowest point, when I finally reached out to mentors I thought knew me pretty well and understood my strengths. I was selective in the people I contacted because I wanted to ask specific questions about the jobs and environments that they thought I might thrive in. One of those people offered me an analogy about getting stuck behind a semi, and another offered me this piece of advice. Find something with special projects in the title or the description, Sarah. You need to learn something new every day. He knew I had a tendency to learn something really well and then get bored with it. I'm not a maintenance kind of employee, and he suggested that whatever I did next had to be more project-related, something that I could initiate, create, and complete. I learned a lot of lessons in those 2+ years that I was in that position, and I continue to face some similar challenges, but now I'm more aware of my actions that might contribute. When I end up in a position that's mostly maintenance and not creative or project-related, when I feel myself getting comfortable, I know it's time to find a project that will challenge me so I won't sabotage myself. I also know when I'm contributing to my discomfort by not paying close enough attention to the signs presenting themselves. I have about 9 lessons here, that I took away from those difficult experiences. I won't say I've completely learned them because these are the kind of things that take a lot of time and practice to absorb fully. Ingrained patterns are really hard to change. First lesson, your contribution may not be necessary or may not add value to the discussion. Stop, think, and listen, and then decide how or if to weigh in with your thoughts or suggestions. Lesson 2, trust is good, but take time to know a person before you start to share. Trust your instincts. If you observe characteristics about a person, incorporate those observations into your overall level of trust and figure out with what you can trust each person in the environment. If someone is sharing gossip with you, they're likely sharing gossip about you. Lesson 3. Related to number 2, be careful where you dump, especially if you live in a small town or neighborhood, and do not dump at work. The person you need to vent about may be right around the corner. And not only is it disrespectful to talk like that, trust me when I say you will not like yourself afterward. As bad as things can be, it will be a lot worse if you know you've earned some of this scorn. Sometimes you need to share frustrations at work about work, but be careful not to become that person who's constantly griping and complaining. Lesson 4. Sometimes you have to play the game. Don't antagonize, especially if it won't bring you closer to your goal. Consider your ultimate goal for every conversation and communication in your relationship and your job. I once hit send on an email I knew I shouldn't have sent. It took me about 5 minutes to feel the consequences and to know how sophomoric I was for sabotaging my own day. That's when I developed that 24-hour rule. When responding to something that gets your hackles up, be sure to give yourself a minimum of 24 hours before sending a message or calling. Lesson 5. Be aware that your position in the project or the job may not be exactly what you want it to be. Find out what's expected for your role and focus. Do your job with all your skills and energy and learn what you must to do it well. My mom once told me that every trial you face will keep coming back until you learn your lessons from it. Remember that what you're going through is not forever, and that you have to find those lessons before you can leave. Lesson 6. Find people you trust and who know you well, but are separate enough from the situation to be able to offer an outside perspective. Ask them for specific ideas about where you should be looking for your next adventure. Ask them for names of other contacts they think could help you bring your vision to life, and ask them if there's anything about your vision that makes them think you have adjustments to make in order to achieve it. The questions won't be awkward, but your answers might be. Be prepared to walk away and absorb for a while. 7. When faced with a difficult situation, reflect on how you would want to perceive it from 20 years in the future. Did you handle it well, with grace, dignity, and compassion? Lesson 8. Sometimes people are just mean, and it's time to either call them on it and stand up for yourself, or get out so you don't have to interact with them. And number 9, my most unpleasant lesson. Figure out how you might be complicit in your own patterns of frustration in jobs and relationships. Because until you identify your patterns, you'll continue to face similar situations. The situation you're experiencing will offer really valuable life lessons if you let it. And those lessons may not be just your own. Our sons may have learned some lessons too, about perseverance, how to support those you love, and that sometimes you have to play the game when you don't have the luxury of walking away. There are no easy answers. Be kind to yourself while you work through this. And know you're a work in progress. What makes you happy and content today is likely to change in the future. Take your time and keep on learning. Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
would you tell me that you're going away?